Hello again, guys. I'm back with one more video, and I'm here to highlight some Nightmare 100 footage this time. A lot of you have asked for footage of what it's like on running the tanky, explosive Shadowblight build while pushing the 100s, and I've gone ahead and filmed some for you. I went and re-downloaded Adobe, I busted out the fancy microphone, and I whipped up an actual edited video for you as a final temporary send-off for now. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. I didn't play enough to get another completion while filming for this, and there are a couple reasons why. I'll explain them as you watch some footage of me fighting elite packs in the background, because let's be honest, that's why you're here anyway. I'm going to yammer on in the background here while you watch and get some things out of the way, so if you're just here to watch the build fight, feel free to mute my stupid ass and enjoy. First off, make no mistake, Nightmare 100 is hard. Just because this build makes it possible to get a completion and earn your title, it doesn't mean this is a walk in the park, and it isn't exactly content that is going to be farmed. This is still difficult, and you're very much going to need the right key for the right dungeon with the right modifiers. Some dungeons will be borderline impossible, and some will seem very easy in comparison, and some modifiers swing the variance of difficulty in wildly different directions as well. It took me all day to get the first completion, and honestly, I was in real sweaty try-hard grind mode because I was really hungry for it. Filming this was more of a laid-back, give the people some footage because they keep asking for it kind of gig, so I wasn't really in the mood to put in those hours into try-harding it over and over and over. I've been very busy this week catching up on real-life work and things since I did go really hard in the paint for the first couple of weeks since launch, but I did say I'd give you some 100 footage, so here we are. Second, after completing 100 for the first time, I sort of hung up my shield, so to speak, by wiping out some of my best defensive aspect rolls on gear I used to push, in order to go back to a lazy chill speed grind setup. I hadn't really put much time and effort into min-maxing different loadouts at the time, and my decision to go for the 100 was more so to do with the fact that the Druid player in Korea had pushed 100, and I thought my window to sneak in the Necro clear was closing. So I jumped in and I YOLO'd it on the spot to secure the clear when I could ASAP. This means in order to effectively min-max another clear just for footage's sake, I'd have to reform a bunch of aspects over again, and frankly, I'm kind of just holding off until seasons to go hard on it. I threw together some makeshift stuff with what I had and made some solid attempts, and I even did get the Blood Bishop in one attempt down to like 40%, but admittedly, I hadn't really messed with his mechanics in this difficulty, and I sort of desynced some of my cooldowns into getting in rhythm with his moveset, and inevitably, he ran me out of potions and I died. Running back to him, I got sniped like a turbo and lost my last life, and I kind of just shrugged and called it for the day. I think if I had done it over again, knowing what I know now, primarily that his purple machine gun attack was really the only threat and his blood bubbles were hitting me for fuck all, I probably could have done it successfully without much issue. Now, all that being said, most of these half-ass attempts were still very reasonable, and you can see from footage that I wasn't exactly slouching while I was in there. Anyone that's played high-end keys knows that just from viewing this footage, clearing one is all but an inevitability, depending on which key you get and which modifiers you roll on it. If I had another Shiv to Ruins key, for example, this would have been a quick one-and-done video for you. Some of them are just that much easier than others, but ultimately, by seeing how I'm handling elite packs in this footage, anyone that understands the game will understand just how possible this all is. The main takeaway from messing around with this again was also that I really do think the crit-oriented version I am now using is better for this. This felt much smoother in practice, and the boss was dying much quicker this time for me than he was in my last non-crit version. I went over the changes in my most recent video, but to highlight them as quickly one more time, I'm basically geared out more now to focus heavily on crit damage instead of being all in on just damage over time. I've added crit chance to my rings and my focus, I've added grasping veins to my aspect loadout, I've swapped my 10% HP from the golem to crit damage instead, and yes, that is being used here in this video. An argument could be made that I could have swapped back to the 10% HP, but full disclaimer, I simply forgot to try it out. And I've cut Howl from Below in favor of putting in gloves with crit chance on them. In practice, I can live without the homing missile skeletons as long as I play smart, and the 40% damage I lose from the bonus to corpse explosion is made back and then some from the grasping veins damage that gets added to my Shadowblight procs as a result, which is, of course, the point of the crit build. You aren't benefiting from the crit on your damage over time from corpse explosion, but you are benefiting on it to your Shadowblights. And with the combined 1-2 punch of corpse doing some reasonable damage in the background, while Shadowblight crits on the front end, you'll find your damage output goes up tremendously, especially against single targets. Now that you've watched some Nightmare 100 footage, and all that being said, let's talk about the build a little. There's a link to skills and Paragon loadout I used in this video in the comments. I swapped out Scourge Glyph in favor of Territorial, and I moved my Paragon boards around a lot to account for the change in focus to crit damage. I cut Wither in favor of more HP, but you could always just put points back into Wither if you wanted it. I'm personally very indifferent on Wither, so I digress. As far as skills go, I've seen some content creators talk about using Sever or Blight over Reap. In lower tier content, especially farm-capable content, this is an entirely reasonable swap, and you could definitely do that. I still think the automatic corpse on engagement in any given attack to allow for an instantaneous tendril pulls is very strong. But when it comes to a late game pushing like this, there is absolutely no argument that Reap providing the 15% damage mitigation, in addition to an additional 20% from using the might aspect, is all but required for survivability in these situations. If you find that you don't need or want it, more power to you, but I absolutely love this extra defense layer, especially in long boss fights where the potions are limited and maintaining health is at a premium. As far as gear goes, here's a quick cheat sheet on the stat priorities I use when min-maxing out my gear. First off, a lot of these are very straightforward. I do separate them on the stat priorities I would look for between if I was doing speed farming content or for pushing content. Now, for clarity on this, when I say for speeds, what I mean by that is the content that you're going to be playing in Diablo 4 99.9% of the time. This includes content like low keys, where you're simply farming for experience, glyph leveling, or loot, or things like the Helltide content, where you're running around farming up the Chest of Mysteries and Forgotten Souls. The differences here are pretty straightforward. In the speed build, you're going to notice that we still incorporate things like levels to corpse explosion or movement speed, whereas in the pushing build, we pretty much phase out the focus on needing corpse explosion as a primary source of damage, and instead we focus on defensive skills, such as armor percent, damage reduction from DOTs, or damage reduction from close or distant enemies. The reason for this is that when we're pushing, we care about survivability more than anything, and the damage that we are providing by running corpse explosion is still there, but it's not nearly as high, and cutting layers of it to reduce the damage by about half or so isn't going to significantly make that much of a difference in your overall speed by which you're killing a lot of these packs. It doesn't do enough on single target compared to the crit damage to matter, and trust me when I say that using the defensive loadout, your survivability is going to be far more noticeable to you in the Nightmare 100s than the overall amount of damage. And again, this is all incredibly opinionated. If you guys want to continue running more damage-oriented builds for Nightmare 100, and that is something that you can do and enjoy, by all means, go for it. This is just my personal usage of what I use to do it myself, because this is the kind of playstyle that I prefer. One of the great things about Necromancer, I think, is that there's so much variance in what you're able to do and the way that you can play the class. There's a lot of things you can tweak and what have you, and I really do enjoy that element of this class. Now, as far as the aspects go, what I've done here is I tried to make the two as close as possible to limit the amount of aspect swapping that I need to make between switching for speeds or for pushing. This is an important thing to note because obviously getting rid of aspects switching between the two sucks since we don't have designated loadouts, so I kind of made my own. And I used key pieces that get swapped the most for their different relative stats as the ones that I swap for the aspects, because this allows me to actually just keep two different copies of the item. For example, I moved my Shielding Storm to my chest, since my chest is pretty much a constant between the two builds, and now I simply swap between the pants, depending on whether I want Disobedience for the speed clears because I'm using Blight on my amulet, or if I want Might because I want the extra damage mitigation for push content. Speeds has the +4 corpse explosion for that extra AoE clearing damage, and pushing is just a straight 4/4 damage mitigation stats for me right now. Similarly, the amulets, I keep Blight on the amulet for maximum damage when pushing, and then I swap to the Disobedience amulet when I'm doing big boy push content, because that is the way to get the maximum amount of armor, which right now, as we know, is very, very strong. I still keep movement speed on my speed amulet and corpse skills and what have you and all of that. And then for pushing, you are just all in on your damage mitigation yet again. Now, one thing I forgot to take pictures of and show you here is the reason Corpse Tendrils is on the boots for pushing and it isn't on speeds is because when you're using the amulet for speeds, you're getting the +3 to all corpse skills, which means you can get to 5 out of 5 on Corpse Tendrils very easily and hit that diminishing returns breakpoint for the cooldown. However, when you switch to your pushing amulet and you lose that corpse skills, you need to get that back somewhere. So we put +4 corpse tendrils on the boots. That way, we don't have to put any points in it, and we make up for this loss in all corpse skills. Again, this is entirely open to interpretation. You could just find a defensive amulet with corpse skills on it and stick with it if you wanted to. Again, I am just showing you what I use myself. As far as Black River versus the Blight Wand, Black River is great in performing the function that it does for group clearing very quickly, but in the high-end content, since a lot of the times you're getting down to single targets, the single big elites that hang around and last for a while, yeah, it's not great for those situations. And you don't really want it on bosses. You always want to switch to a wand. So it's good for the quick clearing, but ultimately it gets shelved because we just don't need it when we're pushing the Nightmare 100s. You could switch to it if you wanted to, but you'd have to find another way to get Blight back into your rotation as well. By giving Black River up, it gives us that extra aspect slot to sneak might into the overall spread. This is why I just feel like it's really comfortable and I prefer it. That pretty much covers all of the gearing. Keep this cheat sheet as your own little reference if you want it. Otherwise, just come up with your own. Also, purple indicates that these are stats that I feel are pretty much mandatory on the item. I won't even really consider it for usage unless it rolls that stat. And then the stuff in green is just, these are the stats that I pretty much want to make it be considered an endgame quad item that has exactly the stats I want. If it doesn't have those items, I'll try to make it work, but it pretty much needs to have the stuff in purple, or I basically won't even consider it for use in the current meta. Before we end this, I just want to point out that this build is just one of the many builds Necro has at its disposal, and the idea of it being the best or worst for any given function is entirely open to opinion. Some may like the playstyle, some may hate it, but all that really matters is that it's capable of 100 Nightmare clears. I'm sure other builds like Bone Spear are also capable in the right situations and may require a more traditional kiting method while running from enemies, but my own playstyle prefers the ability to get right up in their face and fight them for periods of time without having to run away. The damage isn't nearly as high as some of these other sorceress builds you're going to see that can pump out machine gun shots in millions in seconds, but the sustained damage it provides while allowing you to sit at the front lines is still enough to get the job done nonetheless. And as far as Uber Lilith goes, that's an entirely different subject, but I will just say this build is not the build for her. As it stands right now, she's a very gimmicky fight that I personally don't enjoy, and you'll see most of the builds that are clearing her are the mega glass cannon DPS builds that aim to one-shot her as fast as possible before having to actually deal with any of her mechanics. I actually don't mind the slower kill speed on her with a build like this one, but the problem is, even with all of our survivability, she still just one-shots us if we miss even a single one of her spike walls. It feels cheesy by design, and I'm not in love with the one-shot mechanics, especially when she casts so frequently throughout the fight. The fact we have to deal with these so regularly, since we drag the fight out to longer times due to sustained slow-paced DPS comparatively, means it really just isn't a build you want to prioritize for her. Throw together a Bone Spear build for the kill, call it a day, until Blizzard gets their head out of their ass and fixes their overcorrected damage on her spike walls for non-gimmicky builds to actually be able to sustain fight her. All in all, I think this is a fun, powerful build, and I'm not even really still sure what Blizzard thinks of it yet. They'll probably still find some way to nerf it out of principle, I'm sure, so in time, this video may serve as more of a glance into the past of what once was more than anything else. Who knows? I had fun with my time playing it as it is in the current iteration, and once they mangle it in some typical Blizzard way, I'll probably revisit it in the future seasonal update with some changes to make it work at least as close as possible to the current version. But either way, I want to say thank you to the Necromancer community for embracing it in such a positive way. I've dealt with some other flashes of limelight exposure in the past that didn't always receive the best responses, and I know how internet attention can be extremely taxing on mental health in situations like these. But this time around, it was pretty laid back and chill, and you guys are awesome for having so much fun with this, so thank you again. But for now, it's been a satisfying ride, and I really do think this is it for me for now until seasons and/or leaderboards in the future. So to all of those that said Necros were bottom tier trash pre-launch, who's laughing now, baby? Necro Bros for life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.